Stocks, bonds, ETFs, straight out of downtown Chicago. This is Zach's Market Edge.
Welcome to Zach's Market Edge, the podcast about investing in your life. I'm your host, Tracy Reinick, and this week I'm joined by one of my favorite guests, Zach's product manager, Harry Kugayas, who is making his 5th appearance on the podcast. I didn't even realize it was 5 times until I looked it up. 5 times on the podcast, but it's been a while. So anybody who's new, who's listening in on the show, you probably haven't heard from him because it has been a couple of years. I used to have Harry on every year to talk about Greece because he's Greek and he spends a lot of time back in Greece. And so we would talk about what was going on in the Greek economy and Europe in general. But then I guess we weren't as interested or something, Harry. Something happened and you haven't been on for years. But Harry was on the very first episode of this podcast. So that makes it even more special. It was October 13th, 2015. October 13th, 2015. We're coming up to 8 years. And that episode is titled, Is It Time to Invest in Greece? So I guess we could do kind of a look back. I do kind of wish I had invested in Greece in 2015, at least in Greek real estate. I feel like I would be doing very well right now if I had invested in Greek real estate. And we did talk about real estate on several of those older episodes, Harry. So welcome back.
Well, thank you, Tracy.
Okay, so let's talk about Greece because it has been a while. And, we had the pandemic that had to have hit Greece hard because the tourism aspect, obviously. But I'm curious what your thoughts are now that we have had the global reopening on the tourism aspect of what's happening in Greece, because I seem to know everybody who's going there here in 2023 because it's reopened. So we all want to go back. And I know some countries that were big in tourism or states like Hawaii, they actually felt like the pandemic was a chance to reassess what was going on with their economy, with the jobs, with tourism. Maybe they were over-touristed. There were a lot of stories in the last couple podcasts we did was like 2019, I think. And we did talk about the over-tourism at places like Santorini in Greece, and that they were putting on restrictions on how many cruise ships could come in the port at one time because they just couldn't handle 20 or 30,000 people getting off those massive ships at the same time in those small little Greek towns there. So I'm curious, what you've spent time in Greece during the pandemic. What is your views on, what is going on over there with the tourism aspect?
Yeah, the tourism, this particular year has been fantastic, with the reopening. Santorini, Mykonos. Over the summer, they were putting out press releases, please don't come here because there are no rooms to be found. So it is really great. And of course, the prices are just astronomical there during the summer. So that is good for the local economy. And also in Athens, a lot of B&Bs have sprung up. And unfortunately, quite a number of those B&Bs are not Greek-owned; they're foreign-owned.
Okay, so wait a minute. Are these Airbnbs?
Airbnb.
Oh, okay. I was going to ask you, because the last time when we talked, Airbnb wasn't as big of a thing, kind of. It did exist, but it wasn't, like it is now. So I was curious how much Airbnb has, gone into some of these cities. So continue. Sorry.
Yeah. So I think what happened is over the pandemic, there was a lot of, as you said, reassessing going on, and the real estate market was really quite low. So foreigners, foreign companies And also a lot of Middle Easterns, because of the sort of horrendous conditions that are there, they started moving to Greece. And of course, Greece, I believe it was last year, they made a policy to where if you had a certain amount of money, you could get Greek citizenship, and then obviously EU citizenship. So quite a number, even in Corinth, even in where we have the house in the village, people have bought from, foreign places.
Wow.
Either Lebanon or Jordan, and from the Russia. A lot of Russians, obviously, particularly in Cyprus. So they bought up a lot of these apartments for next to nothing. Apartment buildings, entire apartment buildings, and turn them into Airbnbs.
Okay.
So the whole downtown of Athens have been transformed, which is good in a way, right? Because
I was just going to ask that. Is that good? What was happening there before they transformed those buildings? Were people living in them? Were they just kind of, I don't know. What was happening?
Yeah, they were living in them, but it was very dilapidated. Right.
Okay.
I mean, the Ammonia Square, which has kind of been the hub of Athens for many, many years, centuries, that really became dilapidated because a lot of the folks were moving into the suburbs. It's kind of typical activity, from the middle class moving out to sort of the wealthier suburbs. So that became dilapidated, and these buildings, some of them are really beautiful. They were built before the war and very good construction. So they came in and transformed into Airbnbs. And unfortunately, though, for the locals that want to have their kids in Athens and want to buy something or rent something, the rents have gone through the roof there. And of course, to buy something, as soon as it goes on the market, it gets picked up by somebody because there's a lot of need for housing.
I think a lot of places are having that issue.
Yeah.
What is the situation in Athens with like digital nomads? I was on a couple blogs where they were talking about, being a digital nomad in Greece in general. And, now that we can work from anywhere, and you've worked from Greece for Zacks in the past. Yep. Why not? If I can work from anywhere, why not go there at least for a couple months in the summertime? Yeah, but what is, have the digital nomads? I mean, there's stories out of places like Mexico City during the pandemic where the digital nomads discovered that it was actually cheap to get, like a Airbnb there. And the Wi-Fi is pretty good. So they got kind of taken over by the digital nomads. Like there was actually protests of people saying like, leave because you're taking apartments away from the locals and all of that. Is there a digital nomad like problem in Athens, or are they still like welcoming it, or what's that like?
Well, they're still welcoming it because, the two top sort of income generators for the country are shipping and tourism. So they really do welcome that. And I would add to the digital nomads, there are energy nomads that are down in Greece from the northern countries of Europe because the energy costs are just astronomical up there. So they're finding that they can rent or even buy homes down in Crete or maybe some of the southern places in Peloponnese and the Aegean Sea islands. So there are a lot of them during, the fall and winter months that, decided to just stay there.
Yeah. So I see that I'm checking out right now as we're talking about this, the requirements for getting a Greece retirement visa. That's different than the digital nomad one. I'm sure they probably have one for digital nomads, like what you need if you want to stay longer than the 90 days, which Americans can go in there for 90 days. But the Greece retirement visa for the non-EU people, I have to show at least 2,000 euros per month of passive income And then I need an additional $400 per month for a spouse and $200 for each dependent family member if I have those. And it can be a pension, annuity, investment income, dividends, any of that. That doesn't sound too bad.
No, it doesn't. I think they also need to transfer a certain amount of funds into the Greek. I think it was $500,000, and I think they dropped it to either 200 or 100,000, and it's one of the lowest. I think Portugal and Greece are one of the lowest sort of entry points as far as, you know, getting EU citizenship.
Yeah. Okay. So I see that. I had to scroll down further. There is a separate program. So that first one, if you just have the 2,000 a month thing, that gets you in for 2 years, and then you have to like reapply. But the Golden Visa program is the one you just mentioned. And that's where you have to buy real estate for 250,000 euros in Greece. And then you get this Golden Visa. Now, I know that Portugal had this Golden Visa type of thing going on for numerous years before the pandemic, but they're getting rid of it because too many Americans and Brits all went down there because it was fairly attractive too. I don't think it was 250,000, but it was pretty low. And so everybody's taking advantage of that and just going in there, and it's driven up the home prices for all the locals absolutely. Now. So is that happening in Athens too? Oh,
in Athens and also in, Peloponnese and Thessaloniki, which is up north. Okay. There, like I mentioned, there are a lot of Russians that come. A lot of, obviously, with the war going on, a lot of Ukrainians have come down and rented homes in Greece.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
So, and I mean, partly is to get away from the sort of disaster that's happening there, and partly, I think, is that, if you can, you mentioned nomads. I mean, if you can work from anywhere, why would you want to be in an area that is, has problems? So that is adding to the housing sort of crunch, so to speak.
Yeah.
Prices have really gone up. In addition to that aspect of it, there's a big development where the old airport used to be in Athens. It's called Elliniko. And it's like an $8.5 billion development that's going to have a casino and deep water port and all the amenities that go along with it. So that is really pumping a lot of money, and the prices around that area are going crazy. I mean, really, really high.
So has there been any kind of complaints against Airbnbs and things like that, that people are going in there, or no? Everybody just sees it as this is investment and it's good?
Well, I think in both cases, there are folks that are pro and con. The locals basically want, people to come in, obviously, for tourism. But the other aspect of it is the locals also can't get housing because a lot of those apartments have been bought up and turned into B&B. So that aspect is going in. And one of the other things that I think is good for the local economy is that it does bring in not only the Americans and the Canadians and the Australians in the summer, it does bring in a lot of the Europeans that stay a lot longer. So in that sense, I think it's welcome not only by the businesses and folks in Athens, but also in the, in the rural, or not rural, but, outside of Athens, less cosmopolitan areas.
One of the times when I had you on, it might have even been the first time, we talked a lot about the brain drain of the young, talented Greeks who couldn't find the type of jobs they wanted in like Athens. But this was many years ago now. And then so they would, because they're in the EU, they could leave. They could go to Berlin, they could go to London, they could go to Paris, Amsterdam, wherever. And so that was really, causing some issues because the talent was not staying in Greece then. Has that turned around in recent years? Because of work from home, or just more maybe, people discovering that Athens was cheaper and, some more businesses coming in there? Where does that stand?
Yeah, there are businesses that have come down, particularly in the software and also in the I don't know if I'm using the right term, medical tourism.
Oh, yeah.
So that
people are going to the hospitals to get things done?
Yeah, procedures such as dental or eye care or whatever that they provide, right? So, but however, there's there are certainly doctors around Athens, but in the rural areas, it's a huge problem because if they can find a job in Sweden or Finland or Denmark, I mean, they're going to leave, and a lot of them have. My daughter has some friends that are MDs, and they're saying, they love Greece, they still want to stay there, but the money is just not there because they get paid a lot more. But again, money isn't everything. So
right. So I do see that they have been trying to attract, tech companies and things in there. And last September, they announced that Alphabet will set up its first cloud region in Greece.
Yeah.
And they're estimating that deal to be $2.1 billion and could create up to 20,000 jobs by 2030. So that sounds like a big deal. Like if you start having like Alphabet or, Amazon or these big tech type companies coming in there.
Oh, absolutely. And that is happening, not only around Athens, but some of the other sort of not well-known cities. I forget the company's name, but they're primarily customer support companies that come in and, hire maybe 50 to 100 folks outside of Athens because it's relatively inexpensive as far as real estate is concerned, as far as, payment, for the folks that work there. And Greeks generally, I mean, in school, the majority, the vast majority is English speaking. So so that's that aspect of it,
whether or not the future retirees in Greece from America would have issues with the language there, but maybe not, probably not in Athens, right? In the big cities.
No, even in the, like where we are in Corinth, you go to any shop, I mean, everybody will speak some English,
Okay. I know one of the times you were on, we've discussed some of Greece's just, problems they were having with the taxation, and there was that added tax, but you would go to the shop and then the shopkeeper would not put it on the item you were buying or whatever was going on because everything was not digital or computerized. So there was no way for the government to know that tax was missing or whatever on the item. That was years ago too. Has that all changed? Have they, adjusted more to, digital transactions and all of that? What's going on with that stuff?
Oh yeah. Right now, I mean, it's very rare that you can go into a shop and not be able to pay by credit card. And they all require, obviously, it to be reported electronically, and all your income needs to be, reported. So to a great extent, they've made an effort to it. Now, how successful they are is a different matter.
Right.
There's still, I think as far as corruption, that sort of in quotes, Greece is still, mired in that, such as, I mean, other, southern Mediterranean countries are also mired in that. So Greece is not unique by any means. But it is getting a lot more streamlined right now. You can make appointments online with pretty much all the agencies. You can pay electronically for virtually all of them. So things have gotten a lot more, let's say, organized and a lot easier to conduct your private and also, business aspect of the financial side.
Okay, that's good to know, especially, for businesses going in and for, even for tourists. Because I remember even like 8 years ago when you were first on, a lot of the hotels would only take cash, for instance, from travelers. So you'd have to take quite a bit, like even at the cheap hotels to for me, to go all the way over there. That was on some of the smaller islands. I'm sure that's still true to some extent. But now when I look at hotels that I looked at 8 years ago, I see, oh yeah, they're on booking.com now. Oh, yeah. So I can just charge it with my credit card now, and they definitely take credit cards now. It's not all cash.
Well, yeah, they had to because, particularly with the increase in Airbnb, which is pretty much 100% online, right?
Yeah,
They had to in order to compete. So
right.
Yeah.
Okay. What is happening with, allowing like some of the bigger hotel chains to come in there? That has always been kind of missing from Greece. Is there any push to have, like the big Marriotts and Hiltons or Belmond or, some of these big names or the Sandos or the Bahias of the world all, come in there? I'm sure they've over the years been, thinking there must be a way we can get in there with one of our big, like all-inclusives or something. But most of the ones I've seen, even on the bigger islands, have been more locally owned, like family-owned chains. Is that like in the future of Greece that these bigger, international conglomerates might be moving in?
I don't know. I mean, certainly the Elliniko development in Athens, that will certainly attract large hotels because they need to. But some of the other places, or I should say, most of the other places in Greece, resorts are not. It's not a part. It's not just not part of the culture. It's
right.
So I don't know if that would go well. It's not Hawaii where you go in and you stay in one place and do nothing. Now those places exist. There are some places in southern Peloponnese and in Crete that have that, but the vast majority of the accommodations are local and locally owned.
Okay. It's just making me a little bit harder to invest. I'm thinking of ways what companies I could invest in. But obviously Booking is one of them because I definitely have seen plenty of hotels in booking.com. Ticker BKNG. I actually own it in my own personal portfolio. It's up 22% in the last month, that stock, because everybody wants to go somewhere. And Expedia, similarly, it's up 34%, ticker EXPE. Even Airbnb is up. It was way, it sold off big, but even that one is up. In the last month too, like 23%. ABNB is the ticker there. What about something like WeWork? Are there any WeWorks in Athens? That's the the where you can go in and work there as like the digital nomad or something. I did read on some site, they were saying it's hard to be a digital nomad in Athens because everything is old and there's a lot of stone and they can't lay the fiber optic cables or something they were saying as easily. So not everywhere has like good high speed internet, but I'm assuming something like these office sharing type, like a WeWork would be in a location where they would have it, I would think.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know about that aspect of it, but internet coverage everywhere I've been in Greece has been no problem. I mean, a cafe in a village will have internet, and then it's not 3G.
High speed.
I mean, it's high speed. So I don't know if that will catch on because life in Greece and southern Mediterranean is pretty much lived outside. I don't know how well WeWork or other work environments would structure their offices there unless they make them outside, So I don't know. I suppose it could be possible in Athens because it does get congested and you want to be someplace quiet to do your work. So it's possible. maybe they can take off there. But
what about things like electric vehicles and charging stations and all of that? Is that catching on in Greece? I'm sure they're under the EU requirements, to have to kind of go towards electric vehicles. Is that, are there Teslas in Greece?
There are Teslas. Okay. Actually, a neighbor has one in the village. Okay. So it's there, and other electric vehicles are there. They're pushing it, but the aspect that nobody talks about electric vehicles is how are road taxes going to be paid? I don't know if the country's really caught up with that. If they go all electric, I mean, they got to come up with a way to tax your road use, because right now I think electric vehicles are getting a free ride, right?
Is that because it's taxed through the gas?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of,
like in the U.S. Yeah,
in the U.S. and in Greece, obviously, it's gas is very expensive. I mean, it's equivalent to a gallon is like $8.50 to $9. So most of that is taxes.
Yeah. Okay. One of the times we had you on, we discussed the austerity measures that were going on, and a lot of that had to do with retirees and pensions. It was a very difficult time. Like, people's pensions were actually being cut, not many years after the Great Recession, when people were still struggling and tourism wasn't all that great yet. And so I know you're heading into your own retirement. So I'm just curious, if that has kind of settled out now in Greece, and where things stand on the austerity measures that were going on.
Yeah, the austerity measures have pretty much completed, I think. Okay. A lot of the pensions were cut by 50%.
Yeah, it was terrible.
Yeah, so even though they have not been cut in recent years, inflation has cut their buying power significantly.
Right.
So people are struggling. I mean, it's very hard. Electricity costs have doubled and tripled. I mean, the official percent for electricity, I think, is 200 some percent. But the government is, providing rebates for folks in the lower income brackets to offset, the higher energy costs. Okay. But yeah, I don't think that problem is solved. Greece is still, per GDP, very top heavy as far as, government employees is concerned, and pensions. So I don't know if that's going to go away anytime soon. It's 180% of 180% debt to GDP. I mean, that's pretty high. I think it's like the third highest in the world, if not Europe. Well, in Europe, if not the world. So
yeah, is there still a push by the young people? I remember we talked about this too, that a lot of the young people went to go work for the government just because those were like kind of the easy jobs and that's what was available. Is that still the case, or have they cut back on government jobs, because of the austerity? So more young people are going into the private sector instead now?
I mean, there's still a segment of the population that still yearns for the olden days, to where they can land a job and essentially do nothing and get paid. I think a lot of that has gone away.
Okay.
But Europe has a lot more stringent employment laws, so they can't get rid of the people that have that mentality. Well, I'm set because I have a government job.
Right.
But it is changing. There in the offices, it's everything is turning to electronic means, which means a lot less people. Which in essence, I think is a good thing for the folks that live there, because it is a lot easier to do your business, and you know what to expect. It's not something that is going to be left up to the local sort of employee to decide whether you're going to pay full amount or whatever he decides he needs for that month. And it's not just Greece. I mean, it happens in a lot of places around the world, including the U.S., not government institutions, but certainly in private sector, that's the case. There's a lot of people that, do take cash and don't report it. So
yeah. Okay, while I have you on this podcast, and someone else might be interested in this, I'm just curious, what is the easiest way for Americans to get to Greece? Obviously, you're going to fly over there, but do I want to do like a nonstop flight into Athens? Do I want to go to some other airport and connect over if I'm going to some other island? Or what's the best way to actually get there?
Yeah, I mean, it's personal preference. My preference is to fly to Europe and then from there, fly into Athens.
Okay.
And as far as going to the islands, I prefer to take the ferries.
Okay.
I think that's one of the sort of great things about going to the Adriatic or the Aegean is that you can really enjoy a leisurely time on the boat while you're getting there, instead of flying there and then going and having a drink while you watch people go by. I mean,
right.
But it is personal preference.
Okay.
There are very few direct flights from the States into Athens. Most of them sort of, go to Europe first or fly directly from the States into Athens, primarily from Atlanta or from New York. There is one from Chicago. I think it's the only one that is west of the East Coast that flies directly to Greece.
Yeah. Okay. That's why I'm asking, because I know it is a little more difficult. There's not as many American tourists over there. We do tend to try to get there to go to Santorini, but I do feel it's like an extra, effort to get to Greece for the Americans. So we don't tend to go there as often.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the expat Greeks make up probably the majority of the Americans that go to Greece, and there are a lot of religious groups that go to the religious sites in Greece, and of course the people that like archaeology and sort of history, they go for that.
Yeah.
But I think it's, the best part about Greece and the Mediterranean is to be there and just enjoy the nature, the sea, the sun, and the mountains.
Okay. Yeah, you're selling me on it. It's not hard to do. One other question, you keep mentioning that big development outside of Athens. When will that start to be completed? Like, when will they have some buildings done? I understand since it's so big, it probably will be a 10 to 20 year build out, it sounds like.
I think the expected, I mean, I could be mistaken about this, but I think it's 25, 26 timeframe.
Oh, really? So only a couple of years.
Oh yeah, they started already. I mean, they already built, I think, while I was there, I saw the big high rise and all the other accompanying buildings already well under construction. And of course, the area around there is boomed. I mean, there's so much.
Oh yeah, they're calling it a smart city. It'll have 10,000 homes, shops, a marina, 31 miles of walking and bike paths.
Oh yeah, wow. It looks wonderful. If they complete it and they have the funds, so I don't see why it would.
They just are going to keep going. Yeah, it is the largest development in Europe right now.
Yeah, exactly, and it's I think 600 to 700 acres. I mean, it's huge, or maybe 800 acres. I forget the number. Yeah, it's bigger than Central Park. I mean, it's huge, and they want to do
twice the size.
And they're going to have the port and the casino, which will attract a lot of folks from the Middle East.
Yeah. Well, this looks like a great development, given that it was just kind of this ugly airport before. Oh, yeah. I'm looking at some pictures right now.
Oh, it was small, right? Very small.
Yeah, and it looks like it's going to have a beach right there and everything. going
it's
for
right.
it.
It's right on the water. I mean,
Yeah.
lengthwise, I think it parallels the sea, the coast. So.
Okay. I definitely will be checking that out too. Okay, and since you yourself are entering into your retirement and we're on this, stock financial podcast today, I thought I would just ask you, as I've done with some others that I've talked to for this podcast, what, if any, advice you have for younger people who are listening right now, millennials, Gen Zers, about planning for retirement, maybe they might want to retire in Greece. How do they get that $2,000 a month or more to go retire over there? Do you have any lessons you've learned from all your years of preparing for retirement or investing that you might want to share today?
Sure. I think, investing should be part of everybody's mind, right? Because, working, inflation is going to eat a lot of your money if you don't invest it. You just can't have it in the bank unless the interest rates go up to 18% like they did in the 80s, but I don't think that's going to be the case. So, the problem with, I think, the stock market is that, we have a tendency, I think, and including myself, to try to time the market, particularly since, obviously I've been in the financial arena, so to speak, for many, many years, decades. Yeah. It's very hard to think that, well, I can time it. That's a wrong strategy to have. And every time I did that, I regretted it. So don't try to time the market. That's the number one advice that I have, at least, and certainly buy in. I mean, what I think is Bill O'Reilly, the one that got started in Investors Business Daily, had a quote back in the 80s, and he says, if you go to buy something, do you want to buy the cheap one that doesn't move, or do you want to buy the expensive one that moves? And the tendency is that, we want to buy the cheap stuff, and it tends to be cheap in the long run. So you got to watch the social, trends. You got to look around you, what stores, have a big parking lot and a lot of cars.
So that's kind of like the Peter Lynch strategy. He was the manager at Fidelity, Magellan's Mutual Fund all those years. And part of his strategy was like, oh, I just got my hair cut at the Supercuts. I wonder if I could invest in that. They did a real good job. Or one time his wife came home with these bags from a store called The Limited. And he's like, what's this store? And she's like, we love it. So he did do research. He didn't just buy these stocks willy-nilly, but he did believe in like kind of buying what and doing what you just said, like, oh, everybody's at this store, or these items are sold out. I can't even get it. What is that? Like, why are they so popular? And then, looking for good investment ideas through that method.
Oh, absolutely. And to keep an eye out for what are the new things. Right now, information is so fast flowing, but, if you're going to invest, you can't just be a backseat driver. You gotta keep your eyes open and conscious of what is going on. And you gotta be in it. I know in the past, there've been occasions where I sold and I sold at the right time, but if you're not in it, to get back in it is difficult emotionally. So it's best to stay in all the time. Maybe you want to limit what you have, but buy stocks that, have legs, so to speak, that can weather, the earnings have to be good, obviously, and they have to be desirable as far as what the societal trends, show. So
that's good.
It's not an easy thing, but investing is, I think, particularly since you mentioned earlier that, a lot of countries are having problems with the social sort of strata of the population, and social services, Social Security, Medicare, and all that. So the future is not going to be any better, I don't think. I think everybody has to be aware that, hey, I may have to go this alone, and you got to invest, you got to save. So that's the advice that I have for my daughter and for anybody that's listening that's younger.
Okay, that's good advice. All right. Well, I think we've covered all the topics, and I will be sad when you are living all the time in Greece or not working at Zacks anymore, because it's been quite the pleasure, Harry, to have you on the podcast, to be your work colleague, and it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, it has, and thank you for having me on. It's good to discuss things and to give folks a different perspective of what life is. This planet is a beautiful place. We should really enjoy where we are and look forward to going to places where it's different where we are.
Yeah. Every time I do one of these podcasts, I'm like, I'm going to Greece, but I have not gone there yet. But now I will. Now I have to. I have no excuses. Let me recap some stocks we talked about. Now, we did talk about how Google just is opening up that new office for the cloud in Athens, ticker GOOGL there. I was just looking around while we were discussing, and Microsoft opened up an office the year before already there as well, MSFT there, and then Amazon apparently has as well, I think also for the cloud side of things. That makes sense. AMZN is that one. And then we did talk about the Airbnb, because how could you not, if you're talking about any kind of tourism, that they're the name on everybody's list right now. ABNB is the ticker. Booking is also another big one on the tourism side. BKNG, Expedia, the same thing. EXPE. We mentioned some of the office, sharing stuff. There is WeWork. It is still trading out there, but go take a look at that chart. It's a wild ride, ticker WE. And then we did mention Tesla, and that Harry's neighbor has a Tesla, and they're in a more rural-ish type area. So, Teslas are everywhere, and we're seeing some big growth in both revenue and earnings on Tesla, ticker TSLA. And as always, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode of the Market Edge, because you never know what we're going to talk about. Who knew we would be talking about Greece here in 2023, but I'm glad we did, and I'm glad it was the very first episode, because these episodes are interesting and I learned a lot off of them. So be sure to subscribe. You can get us on Apple Podcasts, we're on Spotify, we're on SoundCloud. You can find the first episode on SoundCloud, but I even went on there and didn't want to scroll all the way down, so I just Googled it and found it that way. But you can go all the way to the beginning episodes on some of those sites, and be sure to. And I'll see you again next week with some more stocks.
This material is being provided for informational purposes only, and nothing herein constitutes investment, legal, accounting, or tax advice, or a recommendation to buy, sell, or hold a security. Do not act or rely upon the information and advice given in this podcast without seeking the services of competent and professional legal, tax, or accounting counsel. Publication and distribution of this podcast is not intended to create, and the information contained herein does not constitute an attorney-client relationship. No recommendation or advice is being given as to whether any investment or strategy is suitable for a particular investor. It should not be assumed that any investments in securities, companies, sectors, or markets identified and described were or will be profitable. All information is current as of the date herein and is subject to change without notice. Any views or opinions expressed may not reflect those of Zacks Investment Research as a whole.